I love Fire Emblem. In fact, I love it so much, the first time I went to review a video game was for Fire Emblem Awakening.
Hi, my name's Chris. Welcome to One Up Reviews. Today we're reviewing Fire Emblem Awakening, so let's get right into it.
I just wanted to gush about the world and how intelligent systems had really cracked at that time. Well, I've come a long way since then, as you can see, but I still love Fire Emblem. So when Fire Emblem Engage was announced, I was intrigued. Not just because it was another Fire Emblem game, but because this game is clearly a celebration of the series as a whole. And then I saw the Colgate-ass looking main character, and doubts started to creep in. But playing this game brought me right back to playing Fire Emblem Awakening, where I think I wrote more outline notes on this game than any game I have reviewed in the past few years, and that includes some of my other Fire Emblem reviews. There's just so much to love, and, well, so much to criticize about this game. So, real quick, scroll on down and drop a hiya papaya in the comments.
Hiya papaya!
Hiya papaya?
And on the way back up, why don't you tap that like button, and let's dive into all I have to say about Fire Emblem Engage.
Has your lunch with me today brought you any feelings of contentment?
I was generally impressed with Fire Emblem Three Houses graphically. Intelligent Systems was never known for pumping out visual splendor, and the series was jumping from 3DS to Nintendo Switch, the first time it had seen a console release since the Wii. So, despite some clear graphical blemishes like warped JPEG backgrounds, enhancements like fully voice-acted game, explorable monastery, and more cutscenes than ever made Three Houses a truly generational leap over the 3DS games. With just a few minutes of playing Fire Emblem Engage, it's clear that yet another leap has been made while running on the same Nintendo Switch hardware. The leaps have been made both technically and artistically. While it's totally fair to critique the more colorful and outlandish setting and character designs, their models and animations are vastly improved. It's things like little gestures they make when you highlight them in a menu that makes a huge difference in transforming these units from just another soldier to a realized character. Animations and conversations and story segments are also vastly improved. While the game occasionally falls back on JPEGs, they are much better JPEGs and, at the very least, significantly more detailed. But more often than not, the game will still use 3D environments as the background when it can. And the devs are confident enough to let you roam these environments, and while they're nothing special, I can definitely see a future where Fire Emblem attempts stringing together maps seamlessly, and this is kind of the blueprint of that going forward. The soundtrack is still a certified banger, even though I much prefer the tone of Three Houses, something we'll talk about a little bit later. And from a technical side, the graphical fidelity is greatly improved, while the performance is also much more solid. Don't get me wrong, things can still crumble during the later chapters of the game, but it's a strategy game, so at the end of the day, it's really no big deal. And the cherry on top is more cutscenes. Love them or hate them, they're here, and they're here more than ever. And while they can verge on cringe,
I am so sorry!
I much prefer characters acting in some way rather than just being standing talking models. And when a pre-rendered cutscene isn't used, there is frequent use of in-engine scenes. Basically, the classic talking heads are more or less reserved to bond and support conversations, and the main story's presentation is better than ever. And yes, I much prefer the tone of Three Houses overall. I mean, just compare the reveal trailer for Engage to Three Houses.
You're awake!
Huh?
You're really awake, yeah?
1,000 years? That's how long I've been asleep.
What are those horrible things?
Now, the goddess watches over Fodlan from her kingdom above as the mother of all life, the arbiter of every soul.
The polish here is simply outstanding. It reminds me of sequels in the GameCube era where significant optimizations were expected and equated to meaningful differences between sequels. I'm looking at Pikmin 1 and 2 as an example, and as a kid I loved Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I used to watch the cutscenes over and over and longed for a game with more cutscenes and better presentation of the story. I finally got that game with Engage, and well, this is the Fire Emblem I always wanted. It's just too damn bad that the polish goes to waste on this god-awful story.
Louis, were you watching me again?
Indeed I was. You and your whole coterie of ladies. The sight of you all together pleased me to no end.
So let me know if you've heard this one before. There are these rings of power which were distributed among various nations and hold incredible power. A group must cast aside their differences, come together to eradicate a rising evil in the land, and on the journey they meet a character with dual personalities. Are they a friend or are they a foe?
Potatoes!
So yes, this is 100% the story of Fire Emblem Engage, and yeah, it's a pretty big ripoff of Lord of the Rings. And that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, it's just kind of funny that a timeless framework was used to tell such a god-awful story. And I get it, Three Houses totally didn't rip off a popular fantasy concept as well.
You're a wizard, Harry.
This was by far my least favorite Fire Emblem story in terms of plot, delivery, and tone. And I think it's important to highlight this being a tonal shift in the series, especially in contrast to Three Houses. A combination of art style and plot make this a much goofier game. Bad guys are bad, good guys are good. Any attempt at justifying sides is ham-fisted, and deep, unforgivable wrongs are quickly forgotten for the sake of pushing the plot forward. It is absolutely wild how misunderstandings with dire consequences are simply brushed away, how unforgivable wrongdoings are easily forgiven, and how black and white the stakes are in terms of good and evil. This game seriously has Saturday morning cartoon vibes, and I mean, you are summoning characters from other universes within the same intellectual property with rings, so I get how that can make kind of a hard story to sell, but they really didn't even try, in my opinion. And the twists and turns in the last 5 chapters or so are absolutely wild, contrived, and ridiculous. But video games are cool. They shine in being able to tell side stories where other media can sometimes fumble, and Fire Emblem famously encourages characters to bond with each other in battle. Your army grows stronger together, and with classic permadeath, this adds the risk of knowing that if someone falls in battle, side plot threads become inaccessible. And Engage continues in this supplementary form of storytelling, and I think they kind of blow it. So when I play Three Houses, my main criticism is the amount of unnecessary busy work needed between chapters, and part of that busy work was reviewing the bond conversations between characters before the next chapter. And I remember during my 2 playthroughs, I had a little ceremony where I saved that part of the gameplay, going through support conversations, for eating a snack, having a meal, or having a drink, because I could be sitting there for upwards of 30 minutes just listening to talking heads drone on. Sorry guys, you chose this video to listen to a talking head drone on for 30 minutes. The point is, this is just too much. There's too many conversations, and there's just too many interactions to keep track of when I would revisit one of the 30 sub-threads some 2 hours later. And I think Engage basically has the opposite problem. Support conversations are shorter. They're so short, they're kind of worthless in my opinion. Support conversations between emblems can literally be a sentence back and forth, and support conversations between cast characters are also just too short for me to be invested. So I know I just complained about one game being too long and the other being too short. Well, here's my solution. First, give the stat reward before I listen to the conversation, and allow me to continue ranking up the bond or support without listening to that conversation. Some people just don't care about some or all of the subplots, and some people do care, but might want to get right into the next chapter and will revisit conversations later, something I would greatly appreciate. My second suggestion: there's just way too many support and bond conversations every character doesn't need to bond with every other character. There are about 2,000 combined bond and support conversations in this game, with 650 support and 1,300 separate bond conversations. Who the fuck needs that? Allowing every character to interact with every other character just makes the whole thing suffer. I recommend allowing only bond conversations and support conversations to happen with Alear. And this would have been perfect, considering the protagonist in Engage is voiced again, unlike in Three Houses. This will allow for less throwaway content, and the writers can create longer, meaningful discussions from the frame of the playable character. This is how Persona works, and it works beautifully.
Oh, I think I cracked my ass. On, are you alright? Is yours cracked as well?
Of course not! Isn't it supposed to be, though?
Now, if only there was some kind of mashup between the two. And it's actually kind of funny that the best support conversation is towards the last chapter of the game, and it's between two of the villains, and is part of the main story. And one last note on that story. It is absolutely wild that they made a whole game around bringing the protagonist back across a 30-year history of Fire Emblem. A 30-year history most people, especially Westerners, probably don't have a full picture of, and they go through the effort to make themed paralogs, maps, and music remixes. But when it comes to learning about these characters who fight alongside of you, well, you get a couple of sentences about them, and that's about it. Not to mention, there isn't a whole lot of personality behind any of them either. So, the story aspect of Engage is frankly a mess, but luckily, the same cannot be said about the gameplay.
Meat, meat, meaty meat, meat.
Guys, what if we kissed in the amiibo gazebo? Fire Emblem Engage's gameplay damn well better be engaging after all the shit that I just said about the story. So, sorry to the 99% of people watching who have played Fire Emblem before, but we gotta do the classic elevator pitch on what the gameplay of Fire Emblem is. So, Fire Emblem is like playing chess, but you learn to care about your pieces because, well, they have personalities, and on classic mode, when they die, that's it. They're gone. And in the industry, we call that a tactics RPG. In fact, to go with the theme of Engage being a celebration of the series, this is a mashup of greatest hits from past games. There's a hub world, like there was in Three Houses. There's a world map, like there was in Awakening. There's some kind of closeness to the couple system of Awakening and Fates in the Engage system. There is no weapon durability, like in Fates. And Wolf Knights inexplicably have tails like the Animorphs in Path of Radiance. But there is a lot to break down, so let's focus on the tactical battle aspects first. To start with the Marth in the room is the Engage mechanic. Engaging allows you to summon past heroes to help you in battle. And these guys are quite literally insane. Lyn can shoot people from like 20 tiles away and drop shadow clones. Byleth can allow up to 4 characters act twice in a turn, and Micaiah can literally heal everyone back to full health at the expense of the user. These are seriously powerful. I would have killed for a single one of these in any past Fire Emblem game, but in Engage, they can give you over a dozen per chapter. That is absolutely wild and allows for some of the craziest situations I've ever encountered in Fire Emblem. And you need to use everything you've got, because this was probably the hardest Fire Emblem I've ever personally played, at least on hard and classic Deathless. Not only are their scenarios tough as nails, but the AI is certainly more sophisticated, albeit still exploitable, than in past games, and they will utilize some of the new mechanics, like break and chain attacks, to their absolute fullest. It seems like between the AI, new mechanics, and the devs designing scenarios, a lot of thought was put in to counter player cheese, and that had to be done because of how broken the Engage emblems are, and I think they did a brilliant job. A break occurs through the reintroduction of the weapon triangle. If a unit is broken, it cannot counterattack for the current and next attack, and chain attacks allow backups to do chip damage. This makes sending out a dodge or defense tank, for example, much less viable. The biggest imbalance I did experience is just how overpowered covert units which use knives are. You can do obscene damage via poison and crit while easily generating a dodge tank on avoidance terrain. But things could have been much worse, and it's quite refreshing fighting in varied scenarios again. Where Three Houses was basically a kill boss or route fest, Engage has some fun scenarios to play through. My only other complaint about the core gameplay is there's a fair bit of boss reuse, but mixing and matching bosses can have you fighting as many as 6 bosses at a time. Crazy stuff. Half of the strategy in Engage is on the battlefield. The other half is the meta strategy between battles. There is a lot to do between battles, and Three Houses often made these optional tasks feel like mandatory or strongly suggested busy work. So I was nervous going in to see how Engage was going to address this. And here I have mixed feelings, if not mostly positive news. The good news is most of the optional tasks are really just optional. I've never felt obligated to cook meals, work out, pet my weird dog thing, polish rings, or check out the new Skyward Sword Panzer Dragoon Star Fox mashup. And that's really good, because these tasks are largely dog shit. Why am I polishing this ring, and how the fuck is it engaging in any way? And that's my main critique. Some of this stuff is an okay distraction, but some of it really should have just been a menu, or just kind of happened automatically in the background. For example, let's say I want to use the basically mandatory skill inheritance mechanism of Fire Emblem Engage. To inherit skills with an emblem, you need to obtain a certain bond level with that emblem. The best way to do this is to spend bond fragments. How do you do that? Well, you go to the arena, you pick the character you want to bond with that emblem, you watch a battle play out, you then watch them have a 2-sentence conversation, you then walk to the ring room, you then buy the skill, you then go into a different menu to equip the skill. Why? At best, the devs wanted me to experience a 30-second conversation. There's no reason. Most, if not all of this, could have been menu-driven. It chews up an insane amount of time watching meaningless stuff play out with loading in between. So while a lot of the semi-mandatory bloat is cleared up, I think there still could have been polish and consideration into what could have just been a menu. But this is still an overall improvement, with my only other slight critique being a lack of explanation and emphasis on the bond rings and skill inheritance. Emblem rings are well explained, but I think bond rings should have been gifted with SP explained and the importance of inheriting skills. But at the end of the day, the main missions taken as a whole probably makes this my favorite Fire Emblem campaign in terms of core gameplay. It almost begs to be replayed, optimized, and strategized.
Careful. You can relax.
Wow, we've got some weird sections in this review. Engage is heavily rumored to be a delayed anniversary game. At the very least, it's the celebration of the series. And a huge part of this game revolves around the emblems in both story and gameplay. It gives kind of a Smash Bros vibe, except Smash Bros doesn't really have a story, and at the very least, it's pretty self-aware through characters like Master Hand and trophies. Fire Emblem was kind of assumed to have multiple worlds, kind of like Final Fantasy. There are sequels, but the monastery and Three Houses and the lore surrounding it doesn't really fit in with Marth's world, for example. So to see all of these disparate worlds collide feels a little contrived. Like, the only reason it exists to put Marth and Lyn on the box and tell you to buy it because Marth and Lyn sell Fire Emblem. And I've thought plenty about how maybe the story is bad because the whole thing is just so goofy, but I still think a better story could have been delivered. And I think this kind of thing does work for something like Fire Emblem Heroes. It's a gacha phone game. Kind of expect it to be a little goofy. But when a mainline Fire Emblem game pivots so drastically from being laser focused on telling a very dark story in Three Houses to shoving legacy characters down my throat, I kind of feel like a little piggy with a little piggy bank. And I really do think it kind of dilutes past titles. Feels like Fire Emblem sold out a little here. And to add a gacha mechanic which is free for now in this game, and day one DLC with emblems from the game that just came out feels kind of gross. And when that DLC makes a reference to the gacha phone game, the whole thing just kind of collapses for me. But Heroes is wildly successful, so I understand from a business perspective, but that's why this section is titled Capitalism. Feels like the business took a sharp turn away from the video games are art to video games are addictive. Try the gacha wheel, and if you like this, hit up our free mobile game where we'll milk you dry. And Engage really does lose some of the soul of Fire Emblem for me. I never used the amiibo in Breath of the Wild because it felt kind of wrong to have Wolf Link show up in that game. And here it's like the whole game is Wolf Link showing up. Tons of games have DLC, loot boxes, and the like. Fire Emblem isn't particularly guilty of anything here, but this is certainly the moment where Fire Emblem said fuck it and went all in on intellectual property at the expense of art.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
Now, I love anime as much as the next guy. I just finished watching Evangelion for like the 7th time or so.
Anta baka?
I've gone out of my way to watch Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind in Harvard Square in a theater using an original 1985 reel. I've gone to fucking Japan and dedicated about 10% of my time entirely to Akihabara. So, trust me guys, I am not a hater. However, there are frequent tropes in anime which are decidedly cringe at best and misogynistic at worst. Now, it's a complicated issue for sure, I get it. Sometimes it's the demographic. Shonen anime with a target audience of teenage boys is gonna cater love interests and character designs accordingly. Sometimes it's cultural. Japan is the only G7 country that doesn't allow same-sex marriage. Sometimes it's just humanity. Japan has women's only cars during certain crowded hours in part to avoid unwanted physical contact. And I would imagine any city as tightly packed where train workers have to literally shove you into the car would have similar problems throughout the world. My point is that the crap that anime often pulls at its worst is a multifaceted issue that I think is a valid critique from a Western perspective when the envelope is pushed. And while Fire Emblem has almost always had some eye-rolling character design and controversy, Engage makes a conscious effort to go basically full anime from character design, story, and even music in a way Fire Emblem had never quite before. I mean, just check out this intro song that just blasts you right when the initial load is done. Reminds me of the 90s anime where they would try to dub the intro song for some reason. It's campy as hell, and the closest video game equivalent I can think of is the original Dragon's Dogma theme. And while the opening might be cute, let's look at some establishing shots of a few of the female characters.
I'm a very big feet person, and Paula has these feet that I just want to like oil up and lather and just massage and get real warm, and then paint her toenails maybe a color and like suck the acrylic off them toes and shove them in my mouth.
It's not a deal breaker, but it really is unnecessary. I think the thing that pushed me over the edge to write this section was the costume store. For the first time, Fire Emblem allows you to equip costumes onto characters to wear in the hub world. Now, I really do like this feature and honestly wish there was an option to keep these outfits in battle. What really hit me was the 2 default costumes, and one of the 2 was a swimsuit. This is a game about war, but the game goes out of its way to provide introductory shots of big-breasted characters and then give you the nudge nudge wink wink to toss them into a bathing suit. That's weird, and that's needless. There isn't one thing that pushes this game too far, but enough little things add up in not only a distracting way for myself, but in a way where I would genuinely hesitate to recommend the game to certain people who are rightfully more sensitive about sexualizing and objectifying women.
What are you doing?
Wow, what a mixed bag, am I right? This is some of the best Fire Emblem has ever been. Outstanding presentation, and most importantly, excellent main missions and scenarios. But this is also some of the worst Fire Emblem has ever been. The story is a joke, and there's still a significant amount of time wasted for things that should have just been menus. But this is a celebration of the series, and as a celebration, Engage succeeds in providing deep, challenging tactics, a lengthy campaign, and challenging mechanics to wrestle with.